We're going to look at the NFL news and notes, the NFL draft, and boy, so many things have happened. We got 6 days till draft day. John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, gives us his perspective on the NFL news that is happening and the draft stuff. John, as we get a little closer, I do want to start. Yesterday we talked a little bit about Norman and where we are today. It looks like it could come down to Washington and Jacksonville at this stage of the game. Is that a good move for Washington?
Well, it's an improvement, as I said. But when you talk about the expectations that he's going to come in with, I don't think it's necessarily going to succeed, because that's a part of it. And we know that better than most people, because we just went through Byron Maxwell, who was a high-profile cornerback signing last offseason, and people expected something out of him that he wasn't. And I think that same mentality is going to apply to Josh Norman, who, as I said yesterday, is a better player than Byron Maxwell. He's a very good player, not trying to take anything away from him. But when you give him that much money that he's projected to get, all of a sudden you expect to have Darrelle Revis in his prime, Patrick Peterson, somebody like that. And I think those expectations are going to be held against him no matter where he lands. But from his perspective, it's good that he's ruling out San Francisco, because we know what Chip Kelly does to defensive players.
Yeah, well, if you're Washington, is that a sign that they think that they – I was talking about this earlier, how all the teams in the NFC East – and this is another reason you look at what the Eagles are doing right now, taking a big risk, because all the teams in the NFC East are really trying to find their identity. Are the Redskins a perennial NFC East contender now? The Giants still need help on the defensive side of the ball. Are the Cowboys a team that is beat up? The injury, are they over the injuries from last year? And is Romo, does he have another elite season in there somewhere? And who knows what the Eagles are? And you wonder if this move signifies that Washington thinks they are that legitimate contender.
Yeah, I think they do in the division, and I think they should. If you look at it,
but is this a move that makes them
right now?
Is this a move then that makes them from a division champion to now a Super Bowl possibility?
No, I don't think they're in that realm with the really, really talented teams. Even Carolina, for taking a hit of losing him, is far more talented. Seattle, obviously, Arizona, I think still might be the most talented team in the NFC from top to bottom. Those teams are still a cut above. Even Minnesota, if they get some help for Teddy Bridgewater on the offensive line, I don't think Washington's in that conversation just yet. But when you talk about this division, and this is before the draft, so obviously it's very, very early, and people are going to add some significant pieces. But if you're the Redskins, you have to feel really, really good where you are. You're certainly on paper better than Philadelphia and New York. Dallas is the one wild card, because let's face it, if Tony Romo's out there for 16 games, Des Bryant's completely healthy, it might revert back to 2 years ago where they're the class of this division. But that's a lot of ifs. And Stephen Jones actually came out on a radio show down in Dallas and said, they're going to finally start paying attention to some of these red flags, because now we got Randy Gregory, DeMarcus Lawrence. They can't afford any more hits as far as suspensions go. So hopefully from the Cowboys standpoint, they've learned some lessons, and they'll take some of the off-the-field stuff a little more seriously.
Yeah, John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. We're seeing a lot of 50-50-ness almost on this top pick in the draft. Let me ask you, do you think that deal is essentially known by the Eagles? Again, we kind of hinted around this the other day, but you're still seeing some pretty prominent NFL people think that Wentz is going to the Rams, to send that kind of smokescreen out there. I don't know what the Rams gain out of sending a smokescreen out there. Nobody can do anything. They control everything. So do you think it's definitive that they're taking Jared Goff?
I think it's as definitive as it can be. How he was alluded to it in his press conference. He said he had a very good relationship to the Rams, and even though he contradicted himself at the time. He said connect the dots, and that was a wink towards Carson Wentz, and the Eagles know that he's going to be there. So I think the Eagles' thought process is they certainly believe they know what's going to happen, and the Rams are going to take Jared Goff. Now, things can happen. We're still just under a week towards the draft. I mean, we've seen it time and time again. Jared Goff has never shown any inclination to get in trouble, but who knows what can happen within a week. So things can change very, very quickly in this league. And the Los Angeles Rams, there's nothing that makes it 100% certain that they have to tell the truth to the Philadelphia Eagles and not change their mind.
Exactly.
They have no allegiances toward the Philadelphia Eagles. So, but that's a very unlikely scenario. So you're probably talking 90%, 10%, if that, maybe even higher. But the Eagles certainly believe the Rams have centered in on Jared Goff, and they'll be able to get the player that they feel is the better prospect of the two. And the Rams believe the exact opposite. That's why the draft is fun.
Sure is. And I guess, again, that kind of shows the risk that is involved by Philadelphia here, is that two teams look at two players and have them ranked differently at that height of the draft. It's not like you're looking at two guys at 15, John. You're looking at two guys that you think is number one or number two. And we had Scott Wright from Draft Countdown earlier today on the show, and he said neither one of these guys he said he thinks it's a reach for both. He understands what they're doing, but said that neither one of these guys are really top 10 players in this draft.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, but I also add into the equation that you have to be realistic about the impact of the position. I don't think Jameis Winston was the top player in last year's draft. I thought he was top 3. And Marcus Mariota, to me, wasn't even top 10. So it happens every single year where quarterbacks get pushed up the board. You remember, Mike, back when this process started and the Eagles were sitting at 13, we had a show where we were talking about, hey, maybe they'll go for Cody Whitehair. And I said, no, they're not going to do it because the value of an offensive guard is not worthy of being 13. Ezekiel Elliott, for instance, he's a top 10 player in this draft as a pure football prospect. No question about it in my mind. But I would never take him at number 8 because of the value of the position. And quarterback is different, and we all know it's different. Other than a starting pitcher on a particular day in baseball, there isn't a more important athlete in any team sport than starting quarterback. And I would argue it's even more important because obviously starting pitchers are only able to go once every 5 days. So that's the value of that position, and that's why guys get pushed up the board every single year.
Yeah, no, there's no question, and I talked about it. The quarterback, this quote unquote, John, this franchise quarterback is like a ghost that everybody's just inherently trying to find and chasing, and that they're willing to sell their soul to do whatever they can to go get this ghost that really doesn't exist. The franchise quarterback, realistically, John, it doesn't exist. There's only a handful of them in the world.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of agree with the Eagles' thought process that when you're in the top 10, you might as well go for it because you don't, at least in their case, they have a different thought process than the Cleveland Browns, and they don't believe they're going to be there. And history says, to be fair to them, history says they aren't in this position very much. So this is their opportunity to go get one, and they're doing everything possible. So while I understand that aspect of it,
right,
I also understand what you're saying.
The reaching,
and the fact that it's not. Yeah, it's not likely to succeed,
right,
to be honest.
The reaching for quarterbacks in drafts has ruined more franchises than it's helped.
Yeah, but if you want to look at it analytically, which a lot of people do, obviously, and you go back to Tom Brady, who was the ultimate anomaly, 6th-round pick, number 199 overall. And I use him as the line because he's also, now that Peyton Manning is retired, he's the oldest starting quarterback in professional football. When you go from him forward, you look at every single draft, and you look at the first-round picks, and it comes in at about 43%. where guys developed into solid starters. And that might not sound great, but when you compare it to below that and you go under the second round, so third round or farther, and if somebody gets a Christian Hackenberg there or a Dak Prescott, they might get real excited about the name, but the analytics say it's 5%. You're going to get a hit and get a starting quarterback.
Right. Well, so I think a lot of the moral.
If you're going to get one,
yeah, go ahead.
If you're going to get one, you got to get it at the top of the draft.
Yeah. I think, and the moral of this is just such an inexact science that you never really know who that guy is and where he's going to fall, but the percentages are that the guys at the top are hitting more than the guys in the middle. But we talked about this the other day, John. I don't know if I talked about it with you, but half the playoff field were guys that were drafted out of the first round. I mean, you had Russell Wilson in the third. You mentioned Brady. You've got Andy Dalton. You know, there's a plethora of guys that made the playoffs just this year that were how many guys played quarterback in Houston this year? You know, you had guys that were like Roethlisberger outside of the top 10. You had Rodgers, 21. You had Bridgewater at the low 20s. So a lot of these guys that were playoff quarterbacks this year were coming from teams that were not drafting in the top couple spots. Now, on the flip side, you had 4 number 1 overall guys with Newton and Manning and Alex Smith at the top of that list. But I think if teams ended up with Alex Smith, if you traded what you just traded to get Alex Smith, I don't think fans – and that's part of the thirst. Fans aren't happy with Alex Smith. They want Tom Brady, even though Alex Smith is successful.
Yeah, it's true. And that's why I said it's unlikely to work. Odds say it's unlikely to work, but the Eagles feel they have to make the change and try to go for it while they can. And from their mindset, it has worked in the past with Donovan McNabb. I know people don't consider that a success because they never got over the hump and won a Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. But from the perspective of running a football team, that's all you want. And that's consistently good football for a long period of time. And the mentality is you'll probably make a run in there and get a championship or two. Unfortunately, it didn't happen for Philadelphia. But the era as a whole was undeniably a success. And let's be honest, ever since Donovan's been gone, it's been going from quarterback to quarterback to quarterback, whether it's Kevin Cobb, Michael Vick, Nick Foles, Sam Bradford, name after name after name. They're just not the answer. And the Eagles are tired of it, and they want to get a guy that they can hitch their wagon to. And they believe it's Carson Wentz. And I believe that belief is serious. They do not believe they are reaching. And that's part of the reason we're one of the only people that have talked about it is they brought in Doug Peterson, but not only Doug, Frank Reich, John DeFilippo, all these bright quarterback minds to try to get this process right. And I think it comes directly from the top, not Howie Roseman. I think it comes from Jeffrey Lurie, who said this has to stop. We have to get a franchise quarterback again.
Right, because based on what Howie Roseman said yesterday, this doesn't sound like something that he would be endorsing. And it's almost funny. This is like the Eagles endorsing Chip Kelly. Like, you know what? What you wanted to do last year, yeah, you were pretty smart.
Yeah, I mean, the Eagles have had a big problem, to be honest, as a franchise. And if you look at their DNA of how they do things, ever since Chip got here, it's shifted. It's morphed into a team that contradicts itself almost on a day-to-day basis. And they really need to get back to what they were before, and I think that's why you see the Back to the Future plan of trying to recreate what Andy Reid had here. People may not like it, but it was certainly better than what it's turned into now. They're still in the process of doing it.
Yeah.
And they're still trying to get back to where they are. They pay a lot of lip service as far as building through the draft, what you're supposed to do, what the Patriots do, what the Packers do, all the great organizations. They pay a lot of lip service to that, but then you look at what their actions, and it's always bringing in the Byron Maxwells and trading LaShawn McCoy and doing these things that don't really seem in line with what they say. So you don't necessarily listen to the words, you look at the actions, and I think the Eagles are trying to steer back on course, but it's still a process.
John McMullen, real fast, and John will be live with me on Thursday. We'll have our thoughts on the draft. We'll mock it up on Thursday's show. All right, we know 1 and 2 in whatever order, whatever that is. In your thoughts, who does San Diego go?
I think San Diego trades out. I really do.
Who wants 3, and who's the guy they want?
I think Jacksonville is the one team that wants to be able to get in the position to draft what they think the best player is. It might be Jalen Ramsey. It might be Laramie Tunsil. Judging by their defense and how bad it's been, and Gus Bradley has been obviously defensive-minded, and if he doesn't get that side of the football going in the right direction, he's not going to have a job. So I lean towards more Ramsey, but every time the first and the second pick has been traded, which has only happened 3 times in about 40 years, the third one gets traded too, and I see that happening again.
Dallas is at 4. Elliott, Bosa, other.
They desperately need pass rushers. And when you talk about Lawrence getting suspended, I think they're going to go the Zach Martin route, take the safe pick, and that would be Joey Bosa.
That means Jacksonville would be at 5, but you believe that they might move out of that spot. Let me jump down to the Giants at 10. That would be the top 10, last pick of the top 10 there, another NFC East team. So let's scoot down the list a little bit. Giants, I'm asking you about them because of Elliott. They need a running back. They seem like a team that would not go in that direction. Do you see Elliott getting down to 10?
He could get down there, but I think if the Giants, Ronnie Stanley, for instance, if he drops that far, and I think that's a possibility now, they have to take a left tackle. They desperately need to solve that position. Didn't work with Eric Flowers. It looks like more of a right tackle, and I think they would go in that route. They might even reach for a Conklin. That's how desperate they are, more than Elliott. And we know, as bad as they were defensively last year, they basically spent the gross domestic product of a small island nation on their defense. So they're not going to look defense. I think they're going to look offensive line.
All right, John and I will have plenty on the draft on Thursday. We have another chance for you to qualify to be there with us coming in just a few short minutes, and we will talk more about the changes and the news that happens coming up on Monday's show. John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen on Twitter. Him over there. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Mike.
Have a good weekend, pal.